Hey everyone. This story is based on a true story from Reddit. I didn't intend to go digging through her things that day. It was just a normal Saturday, one of those lazy weekends where the world seemed to move a little slower. Our kids were in the backyard, tangled in a game of tag, their laughter drifting into the house through the open kitchen window. I was cleaning out some old junk drawers, just looking for anything we didn't need. That's when I found it, an old cell phone, buried under a pile of papers in the back of a drawer. It was Claire's, my wife of 13 years. I remembered this phone well. She'd used it years ago, before we upgraded her to the sleek new one she had now. She must have forgotten all about it, just like she'd forgotten about that drawer packed with old coupons and restaurant menus. I picked it up, planning to toss it into the donation pile, but then a thought crossed my mind. Our oldest kid had been asking for a phone for months, begging and pleading every chance he got. It felt silly to buy him a brand new one. I figured I'd check this one out, make sure it worked, maybe clear out whatever was left on it, and hand it over. Claire would probably be on board. She was practical that way, didn't like spending money on stuff we didn't absolutely need. So I powered it on, waiting as the old logo glowed on the screen, flickering with the faintest sign of life. I hadn't seen this screen in years, but something about it stirred a vague nostalgia. Memories of family trips, late-night calls, and silly text messages that had once kept our marriage light and playful. But as it finally opened up to the home screen, I noticed something. A note saved to her phone, tucked away in the corner of an app one didn't remember using much. It was just a random note titled Passwords. Maybe an old login she'd needed to save. I tapped on it, figuring I'd clear it out, but what I saw froze me in place. An email and a password. But it wasn't her usual email, the one she used for work and family stuff. This was different, like something she'd made up just to keep hidden. The username was strange too. Nothing to do with her name, almost as if it were a persona she created. I hesitated, feeling that creeping unease that only comes when you're about to cross a line you know you shouldn't. But curiosity gnawed at me, tugging insistently at the edges of my mind. We'd been together for over a decade, built a life, a family, a home. This was the woman who shared my bed every night, who kissed our kids goodnight with the same gentle smile. What could she possibly need a hidden email for? My thumb hovered over the email app, my heartbeat drumming in my ears. Before I could second-guess myself, I tapped in the email and password, holding my breath as the inbox loaded. A faint sense of dread washed over me. I tried to shake it off, told myself I was just being paranoid. Maybe it was a throwaway account, something she'd used years ago and forgotten about. But the inbox wasn't empty. Far from it. There were dozens of messages, and none of them were spam. The subject lines alone made my stomach churn, a series of exchanges that were dark, explicit. There was no mistaking what these messages were. This wasn't just a series of innocent emails. This was something darker, something I had never expected. My eyes scanned over one exchange in particular. The man she was writing to, one of many, it seemed, had responded to an ad she'd posted on Craigslist. My hand trembled as I opened the conversation, a sickening curiosity forcing me to read. She had written to him in a tone I didn't recognize, like someone else entirely. She was arranging a time to meet, using language that left little to the imagination. She described herself in detail, attaching photos I'd never seen before. Photos she'd sent to strangers. Photos that were meant to entice. I felt my throat tighten, my stomach twist into a painful knot. My wife, the mother of my children, had posted an ad. She was offering herself to strangers. And there, in the middle of it all, was a horrifying detail that stabbed at me. The date on these emails. She had been 3 months pregnant with our second child when these exchanges took place. I dropped the phone, almost unable to look at it, as if the device itself had become something sinister. A chill settled over me, prickling at my skin. I felt like I was standing outside of my own life, staring into a scene I didn't recognize, as if everything I thought I knew had been twisted into some monstrous, unrecognizable shape. For a few minutes, I just sat there, frozen, the sounds of my kids' laughter fading into the background, distant and unreal. Questions clawed at me, each one sharper than the last. Had our entire marriage been a lie? Was this a one-time thing, or had she done this more times than I could ever count? The thought of confronting her felt impossible, too big to even consider. But at the same time, I knew there was no way to go back. I had crossed a line, seen something that couldn't be unseen. This wasn't some mistake, some momentary lapse of judgment. This was a betrayal so deep it cut straight through me. I heard the front door open and shut, the familiar sound of her footsteps as she came back from her brunch. She called out to the kids, her voice cheerful, warm, but to me, it sounded hollow, echoing through the house with a sharp, jarring note of falseness. I quickly powered off the phone, shoving it back into the drawer, as if hiding it away could somehow erase what I'd seen. My mind was racing, thoughts spiraling, tangled in a chaos of disbelief and anger. I couldn't look at her, couldn't bring myself to face her without the truth spilling out in a torrent of rage. So I kept my distance. I watched her laugh with the kids, her face relaxed, blissfully unaware that her secret was lying just a few feet away, buried in an old drawer. I tried to listen, to act like I was part of the moment, but my mind was far away, my heart pounding as I considered my next move. The weight of the betrayal sat heavy in my chest, each breath shallow, each glance in her direction a reminder of what I now knew. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt before, a darkness, a resolve. I was going to get to the bottom of this, and I wouldn't rest until I knew every last detail. Because as much as it hurt, I needed to understand. I needed to know the truth, every sickening piece of it. And I knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed beside her, barely breathing, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of her breath. She seemed so peaceful, so at ease, wrapped in the sheets we had chosen together years ago. My mind, though, was in turmoil. Images of those messages, those photos she had sent to strangers, kept flashing in my head. I couldn't get rid of them, like a movie reel looping over and over. My thoughts spiraled deeper, each one dragging me further into an abyss of doubt and anger. I could barely remember the last time she'd looked at me with the desire I'd seen in her words to those men. Had I missed something, some sign that she'd been drifting away? Or had she always been this way, hiding this secret part of herself from me? The questions tormented me. I knew I couldn't ignore this. I couldn't pretend I didn't know. But every time I thought about confronting her, I was flooded with dread. What would I say? How could I even begin to talk about this without breaking down? I finally slipped out of bed around 3 in the morning, careful not to wake her, and went downstairs to the kitchen. I stared blankly at the dark windows, the shadows of our yard barely visible under the faint glow of the streetlights. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I'd believed about our life was unraveling, like a carefully woven thread being pulled apart. After hours of sitting in the dark, running through scenarios in my mind, I finally made a decision. I wasn't going to play the waiting game. I wasn't going to let her lie to me for even one more day. The moment she woke up, I was going to confront her. I was done being afraid of the truth. At sunrise, I went back upstairs, sliding into bed as quietly as I could, trying to ignore the tightness in my chest. Within an hour, she began to stir. I lay there, pretending to sleep, until I felt her slip out of bed and head toward the bathroom. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure she'd hear it echoing through the room. As she stepped back into the bedroom, looking fresh and unassuming, I sat up. "We need to talk," I said, my voice raw and strained. She looked surprised, blinking as if she hadn't quite heard me right. "What's wrong?" she asked, a hint of nervousness flickering in her eyes. "Claire," I began, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I know about the messages, the emails, the photos. I found them." Her face went pale, her expression twisting from shock to something I hadn't expected, defensiveness. What are you talking about?" she stammered, though her voice held a note of challenge. "Don't play games with me," I said, my anger rising. "I found your old phone, Claire. I saw the emails, the messages to strangers. I saw everything." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. For a long, tense moment, she just stared at me, her eyes wide, calculating. And then, as if deciding on a course of action, She crossed her arms and looked away. It wasn't what it looks like, she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't even remember most of it. I must have been, I don't know, not myself. I felt a surge of rage, hot and unrestrained, bubbling up from the pit of my stomach. Not yourself, I repeated, my voice low and bitter. You were pregnant with our child, Claire. You knew exactly what you were doing. Her face twisted, a flicker of guilt crossing her expression, but she still avoided my eyes. It was just a mistake, she said, her voice trembling. I wasn't thinking clearly. I don't even know why I did it. It was stupid, okay? But it doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean anything? I repeated, incredulous. You posted ads, Claire. You sent photos to strangers, arranged to meet them. That's not something you just do on a whim. She finally looked at me, her eyes blazing. And what was I supposed to do, huh? She snapped. You were always busy, always preoccupied with work, with the kids. I felt, I don't know, invisible. The word stung, a harsh reminder of the gaps in our marriage, the spaces where I had perhaps failed to be there for her. But this was beyond anything I could have imagined. So your solution was to betray me? I asked, my voice thick with pain. To throw away our family? She fell silent, her face hardening into a mask of defiance. It's not like you've been the perfect husband either, she muttered, her voice laced with bitterness. You're always working, always putting everything else first. I needed something, and I found it okay. I shook my head, feeling a wave of despair wash over me. And now what? I asked quietly. What am I supposed to do with this, Claire? How am I supposed to look at you and pretend I don't know what you did? For a moment, a flash of regret crossed her face, but it disappeared just as quickly, replaced by a cold, detached expression. Maybe you're right, she said, shrugging. Maybe we shouldn't pretend. Maybe we're just not good for each other anymore. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had expected apologies, maybe even begging. But instead, she was standing here, practically shrugging off our life together as if it were some disposable thing. In that moment, I knew we'd reached a point of no return. Whatever love had once existed between us had been buried under years of resentment, of secrets and lies. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the woman I had married, the woman I had dreamed of building a life with. She was a stranger. Without another word, I turned and left the room, the finality of it settling over me like a weight. As I walked away, I could feel the walls of our life closing in around me, trapping me in a reality I hadn't chosen. But one thing was clear. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of a dark journey, one that would lead me to places I never thought I'd go. The house felt different after that confrontation, like it had taken on a life of its own, whispering back the words we had spat at each other that morning. Every room held memories, good ones, and now, twisted echoes of betrayal. I couldn't look at our bed without seeing Claire's cold, indifferent face from earlier, without hearing her dismissive words. Maybe we're just not good for each other anymore. I spent the next few nights on the couch, drifting in and out of a restless sleep that barely took the edge off my exhaustion. My mind wouldn't let me rest, racing through each lie, each hidden message I'd uncovered. I tried to keep up appearances for the kids, managing a strained smile over breakfast, helping with their homework after school. But the weight of what I knew sat on my shoulders like a heavy cloak, dragging me down each day. In the darkness, I'd find myself replaying every moment of our marriage, searching for signs that I had missed, tiny clues that had slipped by unnoticed. I thought about the late nights she'd claimed were girls' nights out, and the sudden trips to see friends in other cities. Back then, I'd shrugged it off, wanting to believe the best about my wife. But now, every memory had turned sour, tainted by suspicion. One night, as I lay on the couch, I decided that knowing a part of the truth wasn't enough. I needed the whole picture. I needed to understand the full extent of her betrayal if I was ever going to find a way forward. I knew it was dangerous, that the more I uncovered, the deeper it would cut. But I couldn't live with half-truths and excuses. And so, on the fourth night, I waited until she was asleep, slipping quietly into the office where we kept the file cabinet. I'd already found a few hidden messages and photos on her old phone, but there had to be more. Claire was careful, meticulous even. She'd hidden her secret life for years. It was unlikely she'd left everything on one device. I opened the drawer where we kept old electronics, and there it was, an external hard drive. She had said it was for her work files, and I hadn't thought twice about it at the time. But now, I was certain there was more to it. I connected it to my laptop, feeling my pulse race as the folders loaded onto the screen. My fingers shook as I clicked through each folder, seeing nothing unusual at first. The names were innocent enough: documents, photos, projects, and for a moment, I almost laughed at my paranoia. Maybe it really was just work stuff. But then I saw a folder buried near the bottom with a strange name: Favorites. I opened it, and immediately my heart dropped. Inside were dozens of subfolders, each labeled with a date, each one containing photos, videos, and messages that left no room for doubt. These weren't just random conversations or photos sent in passing. They were intimate, detailed messages exchanged with men I had never even heard of, trips she had taken, hotels she had visited, all laid out in stark, horrifying clarity. There were entries about a man she met at a work conference, another one she'd apparently met online who lived only a few miles away. Each folder was like a dagger to the heart, a cruel, calculated record of her deceit. Some were full of messages and plans. Others had snapshots of receipts from dinners and overnight stays. One folder in particular made my stomach twist. It was dated almost 7 years ago, during the same period when she was pregnant with our second child. She had kept everything, as if cherishing the memory of each affair. The messages were playful, seductive, filled with the kind of words and intimacy she hadn't shared with me in years. I felt sick. My entire world was there, laid bare, twisted into a grotesque reminder of everything I had once held sacred. The depth of her betrayal was staggering, more than I could have ever imagined. It was a hidden world, a life she had kept separate from ours. And I was nothing more than a bystander, the unwitting fool. I spent hours going through each file, each damning piece of evidence, sinking further into despair. It wasn't just about the affairs anymore. It was the cold, calculated way she'd hidden it, the meticulousness of each detail. She had kept every receipt, every message, almost like trophies, a collection of betrayals she had taken pride in. When I finally shut the laptop, it was almost morning. The first pale light of dawn was filtering through the window, casting a faint glow over the living room. I felt hollow, numb, drained of any emotion except a simmering rage that I could barely contain. I couldn't let this go on. I couldn't live like this, in a house filled with ghosts of her lies, where every inch of our life was steeped in deceit. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, I started to think of ways to fight back. If she had spent years building a secret life, I was going to spend as much time as it took to make sure that world came crashing down around her. With every passing day, my anger hardened, turning from raw emotion into a cold, calculated determination. I had given her everything, poured my heart and soul into our marriage, only to be left with the bitter taste of betrayal. But if she thought I was just going to walk away quietly, she was mistaken. I started small, subtly gathering more evidence, careful not to let her suspect a thing. I copied files, took screenshots, saved every message and photo I could find. My goal wasn't just to confront her anymore. It was to make sure she couldn't escape the consequences of her actions. She had built a house of lies, and I was going to burn it to the ground. The first step was enlisting support. I reached out to her old friend, Julia, the same friend who had told me about Claire's more recent affairs. Julia was hesitant at first, apologetic even, but she quickly understood the gravity of the situation when I told her about everything I'd found. She's been hiding things for years, Julia admitted, her voice filled with regret. I knew about a few things, but I had no idea it was this bad. Neither did I replied, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. But I need your help. I need people who can back me up when the time comes. People who won't let her twist the story. Julia agreed, promising to gather whatever information she had, any details she might remember from the times Claire had confided in her. She even offered to connect me with a few others who knew about Claire's behavior. It was strange hearing about my own wife from the perspective of people who knew her as a stranger, as someone I didn't recognize. Once I had Julia on my side, I started reaching out to other friends, people we both knew well. I didn't give them the full story, just enough to plant seeds of doubt, enough to start building a foundation of support. Each conversation was like a carefully placed piece in a puzzle, slowly coming together into something powerful, something undeniable. I wanted people to see her for who she really was, to understand the depth of her deception. She had spent years crafting an image of the perfect wife and mother, and I was going to dismantle it piece by piece. But the biggest challenge was yet to come. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed her family on my side too, especially her father, a man who valued family above everything else. Her father had always been someone I admired, a man who stood by his principles, who expected the same from others. I arranged to meet with him alone, asking him to come over one afternoon when I knew Claire would be out. I tried to prepare myself, running through the conversation in my head, but nothing could have prepared me for the actual moment. When he arrived, he looked concerned, sensing the tension in my voice when I'd called. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "Not exactly," I replied, my voice thick. "There's something you need to know about Claire. Something I can't keep quiet about anymore." I led him into the living room, sitting across from him, my hands clenched tightly in my lap. I took a deep breath, then began to tell him everything, starting with the messages I'd found on her phone, the photos, the emails. I showed him some of the evidence, sparing him the most explicit details, but giving him enough to understand the full picture. He listened in silence, his face growing paler with each word. When I finally finished, he sat back, looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before, anger, disappointment, and shame, all rolled into one. This isn't the daughter I raised," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "I don't know who this woman is, but it's not Claire." "I don't either," I replied quietly, the words heavy with the weight of everything I had lost. Her father nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I don't know what to say, but you have my support. Whatever you need, I'm here." Hearing those words felt like a small victory, a glimmer of validation in the midst of a nightmare. I knew I wasn't alone anymore. With her family and friends on my side, I had the support I needed to see this through. And as I looked around the room, at the remnants of a life I once loved, I felt a spark of hope. She had started this game, thinking she could keep her secrets buried. But now I was in control, and I was determined to make sure she would face every consequence, one way or another. Once her father was on my side, it was like the floodgates had opened. I finally had the courage to continue unraveling her lies, and I realized that bringing Claire's secrets to light would require patience, strategy, and timing. I wasn't just fighting to save face. I was fighting for our kids, for the life I'd built, and for the peace I knew I could only find once I exposed her for who she truly was. The next step was reaching out to our mutual friends. I wasn't about to unload every detail at once. That would be reckless. Instead, I began planting small seeds of doubt, subtle but powerful reminders that things were not as perfect as they seemed. At first, I chose only a few friends to approach, friends who'd been close to both of us over the years. At a casual dinner, I mentioned how Claire had recently been distant and busy with long weekends away. I wasn't specific, but the tone of my voice was enough to give them pause. They started asking questions, innocent at first, but I could see the curiosity growing, even a hint of suspicion. One of our friends, Todd, a guy I'd known since college, seemed particularly disturbed. We'd spent years hanging out, grilling on summer weekends, our families intertwined. I could see the disbelief in his face, the confusion as he tried to reconcile the image of Claire he thought he knew with the doubts I was raising. "Is everything all right, man?" he asked, pulling me aside one evening after dinner. "You seem off. You and Claire doing okay?" I sighed, giving him a pained smile. "It's complicated, Todd. I'm not sure I really know who she is anymore." He frowned, his brows knitting together. "You're scaring me here. I mean, Claire's always seemed solid. What could be going on?" I let my silence speak for itself, leaving him to fill in the blanks with his own imagination. It was only a matter of time before he started to see the cracks himself. By the time I was finished, I wanted everyone close to us to know what she had done, to understand the devastation she had brought into our lives. My plan was working. Within a few weeks, the questions started to shift from private concern to open whispers. I could see it at gatherings, the glances, the hushed conversations that ceased the moment she entered the room. It was subtle, but the walls were beginning to close in around her, slowly, deliberately. In the midst of gathering allies, I found myself drawn back to the old journal she'd kept. I hadn't gone through it fully the first time, but now I felt ready to dig deeper. I needed to understand how she could live with herself, how she could look me in the eye every day and lie without flinching. Late one night, while she was asleep, I took the journal into my office and sat at my desk, flipping through the pages with a renewed sense of determination. The entries ranged from mundane notes about errands and chores to deeply personal thoughts, fragments of conversations she had had with her lovers. But the most jarring part was how candid she was about me, our marriage, and her reasons for each affair. In one entry, she described meeting a man at a weed dispensary. She'd written about the initial rush she felt, the excitement of being seen. She confessed that it was like something inside her had been awakened, as though her life with me wasn't enough to satisfy her. My hands shook as I read the words, the casual disregard she showed for everything we'd built together. There was another entry about a coworker, a 6-month affair that she'd described as a break from reality. And then, as if the knife hadn't been twisted enough, she wrote about a weekend trip she had taken just months ago. She hadn't been visiting a friend, as she'd told me. She had been with a stranger she'd met on a dating app. It was as though I were reading the private diary of a stranger. The woman in these pages was cold, calculating, detached, a stark contrast to the loving mother and partner I thought I knew. But there, on the final page, was something that stopped me in my tracks. She had written about her plan to reconcile with me, to make things right for the family, as if her secret life was something she could wrap up and pack away, neatly and without consequence. I felt sick, a mix of fury and disgust churning inside me. There was no remorse in her words, no guilt for what she had done to our family. To her, this was just another phase, a temporary distraction she could put behind her. But I was done being a phase in her life. I wasn't going to be the one left picking up the pieces. The final piece of my plan was a gathering, an event where the truth could be laid bare in front of everyone who mattered. I knew it was risky, that it would create waves, but I couldn't stomach the thought of this continuing in silence, of her slipping away without consequence. Claire had agreed to host her parents and siblings at our house for a Sunday lunch, a rare family get-together that felt like the perfect moment to bring everything to light. Her father had been increasingly distant with her since I told him the truth, and he looked at her with quiet disappointment whenever they spoke. It was a look that I knew she couldn't ignore for long. As her family arrived, I welcomed them with forced smiles and polite small talk, doing my best to hide the tension simmering under the surface. Claire seemed oblivious, laughing and chatting as if nothing were wrong. It was almost impressive, the way she could carry on like nothing had happened. Once everyone was seated, I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the moment that would change everything. "I need to say something," I began, my voice louder than usual, capturing everyone's attention. Claire looked at me, confused, sensing the weight in my tone. "There's something I need you all to know, something I can't keep quiet about any longer." Claire's eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing her face. What are you talking about?" she stammered, but I ignored her, my gaze fixed on her family, on the people who deserved to know the truth. I took a deep breath, holding up the journal for everyone to see. For years, Claire has been unfaithful. She's had multiple affairs, hidden an entire life from all of us. I found this journal, filled with details of everything she's done, the lies she's told, the secrets she's kept. Gasps echoed around the table, disbelief etched onto every face. Claire's mother covered her mouth, her eyes welling with tears. Her father looked down, shaking his head slowly, as if he could barely comprehend what he was hearing. Claire's face had gone pale, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. This isn't true," she cried, but her voice wavered, the conviction falling flat. I have proof. I continued, my voice steady. Emails, messages, photos, evidence of everything she's done. She's been hiding this for years, lying to all of us. And I think it's time everyone knew the truth. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, a heavy, suffocating quiet that filled the room. Claire looked around, desperate, but no one met her gaze. They were all staring at her with a mixture of anger, disbelief, and shame. Her father was the first to break the silence. "Is this true, Claire?" he asked, his voice trembling with controlled fury. Claire's face crumbled, and for the first time, I saw her truly afraid. She opened her mouth, struggling to find words, but nothing came out. She looked at me, pleading, but I held her gaze, unmoved. There was no going back now. "Yes," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's true." Her admission shattered whatever respect remained. Her family looked away, disgusted, as if they could no longer bear to be in her presence. Her mother wept quietly, dabbing at her eyes, while her father shook his head in bitter disbelief. I watched, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me. The truth was finally out. She could no longer hide, no longer twist the story to suit her. The life she had hidden from us had been dragged into the light, and there was no escape. As her family left, one by one, avoiding her tearful attempts to apologize, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. She had brought this upon herself, and now she was facing the consequences. Whatever love I had felt for her was gone, replaced by a cold resolve to rebuild the life she had tried to destroy. And as the door closed behind the last guest, leaving Claire standing alone in the empty room, I knew that this was the end of us. The woman I had loved, the life we had shared, it was all gone, turned to ashes by her own hand. The days that followed were strange, almost surreal. Claire moved out that week, her departure marked by little more than a few hurried boxes and a strained silence. She didn't argue, didn't try to explain herself further. She knew there was nothing left to say. Our children struggled to understand what was happening, asking questions I couldn't bring myself to answer fully. I did my best to shield them from the ugliness of it all, to protect them from the truth that had torn our family apart. I told them that sometimes adults make mistakes, that sometimes things change. But I knew they sensed the pain beneath my words. Friends reached out, offering sympathy, expressing shock at the news. Our closest family members rallied around me, helping with the kids, making sure I had everything I needed to start fresh. I was grateful for their support, for the sense of community that reminded me I wasn't alone. In the quiet moments, though, I still felt the sting of betrayal. Memories of Claire haunted me, her laughter, her smile, the little things that had once made up the fabric of my life. But with each day, the memories grew dimmer, the pain dulled, replaced by a cautious hope for the future. I filed for divorce, the legal proceedings swift and unceremonious. We divided our assets, finalized custody arrangements for the kids. There was no fight, no dramatic final showdown, just the cold, clinical dismantling of a life we had once built together. The months that followed were filled with small steps forward. I began to reclaim my sense of self, rediscovering passions and hobbies I'd set aside during the years of our marriage. I focused on being the best father I could be, pouring my energy into creating a stable, loving home for the kids. The process was slow, often painful, but with each passing day, I felt a little stronger. The anger faded, replaced by a quiet resilience, a resolve to move forward without looking back. Friends and family became my lifeline, their encouragement and support a steady source of strength. A year after Claire's departure, I stood in the living room of a new home, a place I had chosen for myself and the kids. It was smaller, cozier, filled with light and warmth. It felt like a fresh start, a blank canvas on which I could build a new life. As I looked around, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a calm that had been absent for so long. The journey had been brutal, marked by betrayal and loss, but I had survived. I had rebuilt, and as the kids came running into the room, laughing and happy, I realized that this was enough. I didn't need revenge or validation. I had found something far more valuable, the strength to start again, and the hope of a future I could finally look forward to. Thank you for joining us for this touching journey of love, betrayal, and redemption. We hope it resonated with you, even brought a little inspiration. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. We'd love to hear your thoughts and reactions in the comments. Feel free to share your own experiences or let us know what kinds of stories you'd like to see next. Thanks again for your support. Until then, take care and stay tuned for more great content. Bye-bye.